institutions a lot of times. And so, Phil's story and Elizabeth's story, I think, are also really compelling. I think when you're a graduate student and you're being taught by composers who are in academia, that's sort of what they have the experience of, and that's what they're sort of teaching you for. And so being able to go out and be separate from those institutions, like it seems like Phil was, and I don't know Phil very well. So Phil, correct me if I'm wrong on any of those assumptions, but then also like Elizabeth went out and basically built her own institution, right, which was the Charlotte New Music Festival. And so, don't be, coming from the guy who represents, I guess, higher education in this context, don't let that be what defines who you are, right? I can tell you all the ins and outs of those things, but it's not the end all and be all of a career in new music and arts and in composition. So I think those that's a valuable thing to learn in this, I think in this context, because I don't think higher education talks about that much. They want to, composition professors, they are rewarded for having students who are placed as composition teachers at other institutions. I mean, that's kind of a big accomplishment. And, so it's not particularly well, it's not well suited for someone who wants to go outside those paths. So anyway, I want to bring that up is because those are sort of that's sort of one of the things that I've been with the Charlotte New Music Festival. This is my 9th year I've done this, and it's one of those things that I always want. And so students ask me, well, how do I get a job in higher education? I'm like, I can tell you that, but also understand there are other paths out there, and that's what I think the festival does really well is brings those other voices in.
Can you talk a little bit about the wonderful things about being in academia or having a position? I know there are great things.
Yeah, the beauty of and Phil, when you were talking, one of the things I noted is that I think the happiest any of us will be are when we have a job that allows us to do what we really want to be doing, right? And so, some academic jobs are like that, and some academic jobs aren't like that. I was fortunate enough. So my first teaching position was at Marshall University, which is in West Virginia, which was a teaching intensive university. And so I was expected to teach. No one really cared about what my music was. They just wanted me to teach. I was teaching theory classes. I was teaching back then what they called electronic music, which is digital media. I was teaching graduate theory. I was, doing all that kind of stuff. And it wasn't really what my research was, which was my creative work, wasn't necessarily all that important to them. And then my second position, which was at UNC Charlotte, it was a research intensive university. And then I had course release to compose and faculty development money for me to do projects and travel and do all of that, which was obviously ideally where I wanted to be. And so it took me time to, I had a kind of circuitous path, but I started in a position that at least was a first teaching job to give me that experience, which then helped me get the next teaching job, which is where I wanted to be. And I'll say the other thing, and Phil was a great example of this too. Like what I was doing as an assistant professor and as a professor is different than what I'm doing now as an administrator. And I think a lot of times we forget that our trajectory of our careers, like when I got my doctorate when I was 28 and I got my first teaching job, I was like, well, now what do I do? Like, I just like, this is what I was, I was kind of born and bred and educated to do this one thing. And now I'm doing that. I'm like, well, now what do I do for the next 37 years of my career? And so understand your career is going to have different phases as it goes along. And, there was a time when I used to love the light bulb moment when I was teaching, right? That's a really, I think anybody who does any teaching knows that light bulb moment is really a powerful moment as a teacher. And then when I became an administrator, I had a light bulb moment in that, wow, I can fix a problem for 100 students as opposed to only interacting with that one student or that small group of students. So, your career, trajectory evolves. And I, now I'm doing less teaching, but I'm doing more mentoring, and it's not mentoring necessarily of students, it's mentoring of faculty, even faculty who've been doing this for 25, 30 years already. They ask me, what should I do in this situation? So, which to me is just another extension of my teaching. Um, academia has its advantages. Stability is a big one. But as long as you've got the freedom to do what you really want to be doing, it has stability and it has access to, when you work in a school of music, you got all kinds of performers around. Right. And that's an
Yes,
advantage,
right.
as opposed to, I mean, it sounds like Phil, and you may want to jump in and talk about this, but Phil probably does a lot of performing of his own music, right? Because he's of the, without an institution affiliation as much, it's probably harder to get those, to build those relationships, to get those performers. What do you think, Phil?
That's the key. The key is word is relationships.
Yeah.
And honestly, my rock and roll career and my solo piano career enabled me to do what I do now. And I have a lot more commissions. And what's happened with me, I was going to talk about this a lot tomorrow, but this is a good time to do it. A lot of the commissions that I do, I've been known for writing music of place. And I think that was pretty accidental. I mean, I started the first couple of records that I did were Montana themed. I come from Montana. So they were Montana themed things. And, the first record was an homage to my childhood in Montana. And putting it out there was difficult because I didn't think there'd be anybody in the world who felt any of that stuff. I thought it was so specific to where I grew up. And sure enough, people did identify with it. And, they would play the record driving through Montana and things like that. So I got known for writing music that seemed to be actually of a place and not just naming a piece Glacier Park at dusk when, you're writing it from Passaic, New Jersey, and it's more like Passaic than it is about Glacier Park. And so being able to go into a situation, I love residencies. I love not artist residencies per se, where you go and work a lot. Those are just phenomenal if you get a chance to do any of those. I was involved with the U-Cross Foundation for a long time with the selection committee. I'm sorry if I turned anybody down, but or I'm happy if I let you in. But the kind of residencies where you'll go in and you'll work in the schools, you'll work with local musicians, and over a period of time, sometimes it's a year, sometimes it's not that long. Generally, my those kind of residencies have been over a period of a year where I actually get to know the place. I'll go back and forth. I'll do concerts with the local musicians, figure out who's going to play my piece and all that sort of thing. So those kind of things really came through, John, what you were talking about, and that's connection. Those are people who knew me through something else. I didn't just throw my name out there and say, hey, I write this kind of music, you should have me. You can do that, and sometimes that seems to work a little bit, but it's much better if you have a connection through other musicians in the region, which happened to me a lot, or through people who knew me from previous music. And what's really been interesting is that I have a lot of freedom that way. I'm limited by some things, but people don't ask me to do the same thing I did 10, 20 years, 30 years ago. So I get to write what for me is new music and what for me is what I'm thinking about currently. So it's worked out really well. But I would say that, as John said, everything for me has come through connection. In my case, it's not, we in the West are kind of arrogant about where we come from. We like to say, okay, well, the East is about the aristocracy. The East is about who you know. The West is about meritocracy. It's about what you can do. That's not altogether true. There are little shades of that in both regions. But I think you have a little more freedom to come out and just say, hey, I can do this. Listen to this. In parts of the West, partially because in the middle part of the Rocky Mountain region, it's less sparsely populated. I did a thesis on that at Harvard, which was comparing Indian tribes to geographical, ecological regions and comparing their religions to that. It was in a comparative religion course. And, simplistically, I said, well, in the East, you've got all these forests and you have to know everybody. You have to know who your enemies are. To some degree, that's true. You can't see them coming. I said in the West, It's a more visionary, the vision quest is a very big deal in the tribal peoples out here. And I said, that's because you can see 100 miles. And you don't have to worry about people coming, sneaking up on you because you can see them. So, very simplistic thing, but in some ways that kind of set a path for me in terms of composition of different regions. I would compare the density of people, the density of buildings, the density of undergrowth, the density of animals, the types of animals, the previous tribal peoples who had lived there, the kind of religions they had, the interaction with white intrusion, compare all those things and then start putting a piece together and then live in that spot and be able to reflect that back in musically. So yeah, it is about connection, John.
Yeah, and it's sorry, and Phil, you make an interesting point that's embedded in there, I think, is that, a lot of times as composers, we're trained to be in this sort of 19th century egocentric sort of context, right? Where you're writing music for a specific thing and you're writing music because music is in itself awesome, right? As opposed to what Phil's talking about, which is really something that music, at least music in higher education, is terrible about. Music, maybe in other realms is better at it, is that sort of community engaged piece of it, right? So Phil's talking about going into communities and being an artist and working with those communities, as opposed to there's sort of this ivory tower approach in higher education that, well, we do something that's great, and then our community engagement is bringing people into this recital hall and then we show them what good art is, as opposed to going out in communities and actually working with communities. And it's other art forms. At UNC Charlotte, I was part of a college of arts and architecture, and architecture is all about community engagement, right? They just don't want to build this sort of monolithic beautiful building. They want to build a building that is functional to a community. And so there's a lot of community engagement that goes in with that, as opposed to sort of on the fine and performing arts side, we like to say, pull back the curtain and here we are, we're, here's something awesome, which isn't being as successful anymore, I don't think. And so a lot of what I'm doing as a director is trying to find new ways for us to understand how our art form exists and how it engages, our audiences and our communities and things like that, because we can't just sit back and have this sort of 19th century conservatory context anymore. It just isn't working. And so anyway, Phil, I'm glad you brought up that sort of community engaged work, not necessarily residency where you go off and you're isolated and you write a bunch of music, which I've done, and it is amazing. But the kind where you go out and you actually, it is a residency and you're engaged with some sort of community, is of paramount importance. So anyway, just that's something that to not be missed, I think, in what Phil was selling there. I think there's some good stuff in there to unpack. So. I've got the chat open. If people want to shoot questions to me and Phil, I can read them out as we go. We're happy to sort those out. Or Phil and I can just keep talking. Oh, I see a hand up.
Talk for
Yeah, Phil and I are having a great conversation.
Yeah.
Next time I'm in Montana, Phil and I are going to get a beer because it's going to be great.
For sure.
Anyway, I think Ben had a question up there. Is that you, Ben? Yeah, there you are.
Yeah, that's me. Yeah, really interesting conversation so far. I think it's really good that we have sort of both an academic, somebody coming from academia and somebody who's not, just to get this discussion, because I've been thinking a lot about what happens after my doctoral degree and where I'm going to be. And it seems like, I guess something that I'm thinking about right now is the future, obviously, but I'm just wondering, for either academic or non-academic positions, it seems like making connections is the best course of action with friends and other conductors and other musicians. I was just wondering if you could be like even more extensive. Like, what are all the possible things that you should be doing in your terminal degree or your graduate degree, just whatever final thing it is, to put yourself in the best position post-school?
John, sounds like you.
Yeah, is that me? Okay. And Ben
Yeah.
and I talked a little bit about this, but I guess, one of the things I would say is like school isn't the only experience that you need to be experiencing, right? And so and I will say that my success in academia actually has come more from, I mean, being a good teacher and, writing grants and things like that, but it's the stuff I've done that's sort of ancillary to that, which is to Phil's point, a little bit more like what Phil has done. Like I've worked with, when I lived in Charlotte, I did a project with the Charlotte Folk Society, and then doing concerts with a number of the art museums in town and things, so those are things that are sort of outside of what would be expected with academia, but those sort of connections that I made to the arts community in general. And so those kinds of activities will really set you up. I think grant writing is a enormous skill that is very, very important. And it's very different than, I think a lot of times in higher education, we're taught to write very clinically. And that's very different than writing a grant proposal as an artist. You have to be passionate about your work. You have to be able to articulate the value of your work and to other people. And there are some really great opportunities. I haven't done it in a while, but there was a really great workshop I did with Creative Capital, if anyone knows that organization. It's out of New York, but they do regional sort of things. I did it through the North Carolina Arts Council when I lived in North Carolina, and they had a workshop that was strategic planning for artists. And it gave you sort of, it gave you grant writing advice. It gave you even business advice on how you structure, like how much do you charge for a commission, those kinds of things. And it was all kinds of artists, not only artists, musicians and composers, but visual artists, sculptors, those, just anybody was there. And getting involved in those sort of local arts. I don't know if you all know how like arts funding is structured in America. It's really horrible and terrible, but you have to understand it in order to. So the NEA can no longer give money directly to an artist, can't be done because of, I don't know, it was the mid 1990s. I don't know, Phil, if you remember this. There was some very controversial art that went around, and then very conservative members of Congress were like, why are we giving money to these crazy people? That's not what I want my money to go to. And so the NEA was forbidden to give money directly to artists, which actually created an entire funding structure underneath it, which were local arts units or local arts councils, if you will. So for example, in North Carolina, there's the North Carolina Arts Council, and then under that, there are regional arts councils. And so the money goes from the NEA and then it trickles down to these regional arts councils who can give the money directly to the artists. But what happens is that feeble amount of money that the NEA has gets filtered down. And of course, the North Carolina Arts Council has to survive somehow. So they have to take their slice of the pie, and then it maybe goes down to the regional arts councils and they get their slice of the pie. So what we get is really a pittance of what's really out there. And if you compare, so the NEA, can anyone tell me the NEA, their yearly funding? What's the NEA budget look like?
Yeah, it's the same as the United States Army Band.
Yeah, so it's like 150
Seriously.
million. Yeah, it's 150 million for the entire United States. Do you know what the National Science Foundation budget is? Anybody? Ben's typing. That's it. Yeah, 150 million is it. National Science Foundation, 11 trillion. Trillion.
So the moral of that story is do your research. Do your research in something that can get funded by the National Science Foundation.
Well, and I'll tell you, so here's a bonus in higher education, right? Is that, so when I worked for UNC Charlotte, which is a Research 2 institution, there were some of our dance colleagues that were working with computer science and digitizing movement. And their grant proposals were in the at least 6 figures, if not 7 figures, that they were getting. And it could buy out your entire line, right? You could say, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to write this grant. I get this grant. That grant's going to pay my entire salary for the next 5 years. And I'm not going to teach a day. I'm just only going to do my art, right? Because it was in the context of this huge grant. So, the most the most that are out there. I mean, there are some that are bigger, but those are private foundations. But like public money, North Carolina Arts Council fellowship is like 10,000 for a year. The Arts and Science Council, which is the local arts council for the Charlotte region, they had one that was really prestigious. I think it was maybe 40 grand that they started doing, but most of them were, I mean, the grants that I got 5 or 6 of them were like 4,000 at most. It's really a pittance for what's out there for other funding. So anyway, that's just sort of a context of sort of arts funding. But if you can, I got a lot of mileage out of writing as an academic, writing grants to get, and I love spending other people's money, but it becomes easier for me if I write a grant proposal and I get $4,000 from the Arts Council, and then I can go to the inside the university and say, look, I've got 4,000 of other people's money. Other people outside the university knew how great this project was. What can you do for me? And so, the largest amount I got was about a $40,000 grant internally. And then I added to that with external grants. And you can do it the opposite direction. Like I went to the Arts and Science Council and said, I've got this $40,000 from UNC Charlotte. What can you give me? And they gave me another, I can't remember, 3,000 or 4,000 on top of that. And then I went to somebody else and somebody else. And then you can build a budget around something that's pretty, that can work. But and I'm sure Elizabeth has tons of experience with that, pulling in grants for the festival and other things. But I see Elizabeth there, so we might want to turn it over to Elizabeth to do some talking.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay. You guys are really talking about some great stuff and really relevant things. And I wanted you guys on here because you're both so different in your paths and backgrounds, and
We both like beer, though. We know that, so that's good.
yeah. There's a lot of similarities, a lot of differences, though. A lot of, I think, unique paths you guys are on, and I mean, I am too. I know that, but I figured it would be really interesting for people to like kind of just hear the similarities and contrasts and pros and cons of all of the things we're up to. Yeah, there are really great breweries, so I hope we can get together next year. Everybody's invited back to hang out and get your networking in and come see Charlotte, and I'll give you a little music venue tour, because I like to have concerts out in the public. I don't like to have them at schools, churches, or what was the other one? Schools,
Museums
churches.
are good.
No,
The
museums are
tattoo
good.
parlor,
Those
the
are
tattoo
good.
parlor was my favorite.
That's
Which
a good
one?
one. That was a
The
good one.
tattoo parlor.
Oh, yeah.
That was amazing.
I
So
like brewery
Elizabeth,
concerts.
yeah, Elizabeth, tell them some of the venues you've used, because it's really, you do a really great job of like integrating the festival
Yeah.
into the city and really
Well,
gives you a flavor for the city.
yeah, a couple weekends ago we had the festival at the farm, and then just an in-person one day outdoor festival, and then but the past years, like you said, we did a tattoo shop, warehouse, breweries. I'll do a concert hall. That's the other thing I don't do usually, is concert halls. But I mean, the sound is nice, but it has to have accessible parking. Like, I don't want people to deal with parking decks and all that stuff. I don't, for me, I'm not big enough to demand that yet. So of people to find parking like that, unless it's just going to be some outrageous experience. But so where else have we been? The very first festival was at a lake house I rented at one of the lakes around Charlotte, and it was more like a retreat. And we had about they had a bargain. They did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can remember. I mean, the first festival you did, it was like The Bachelor. Like, I mean, it was like this big mansion
Yeah.
on this recreational lake. And the guest composers like me showed up, and like everybody rolls out of their bedrooms. They came down to the living room, and they had a projector set up, and we gave our presentations, and then we go off to a little nook and do composition. It was amazing.
They had a little beach, kayaks, and all kinds of stuff. So I don't know, we're a little too big for that now, but
just need a bigger mansion.
Yeah, we
So what
do.
you,
We
so
do.
what you're saying is you have to work around things sometimes. If you want to do things that are different, you have to be
Yeah.
really creative in whatever it is that you
Yeah.
decide to do. Pamela Z was on earlier. I hope you got to hear her all the time. She's so great. Has so much to say and so much to offer. And
Right.
we were talking about how you how you get through with whatever it is that you're doing. And I think number one, you have to love it. You have to
Yeah.
love what you do. So I highly recommend that idea of writing down, here's what I love.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a silly thing to do. It might surprise the heck out of you. And you might say, no, I can't do that. And then you might say, oh, I have the will to do that. So love and will are the two really important things for me in my life. If I love something, I will have the will to do it. It's harder to develop the will to push through stuff. So if you're in a situation that is not the ideal, make it the ideal. The situation might not be the problem. You might be feeling trapped by something when you're not really trapped. The trap is in your mind, and you
I've
can break
learned
out of
that
that.
there is basically a solution to every problem,
Mhm.
and you have to get creative, and you cannot give up, and you have to be persistent. I mean, that's the same thing as not giving up, but um, and you just always have to think about ways to solve those problems and ways to make things happen no matter what. Like the first festival, I advertised that thing, but I never threw a festival before. And, I was just telling someone this morning on a call today with one of our vision career calls. And I mean, I knew that I was going to do whatever it took to make what I advertised a reality, but not, you know, it was a little scary. It's a little intimidating, but that's just what it is. That's how it is. And you have to know and believe in yourself and do everything it takes to make it happen. There are no excuses. When somebody bought a ticket from China the first year, I was like, okay, I really, we
Mm.
have to have this happen. Like this, otherwise I got to pay for his ticket. Um, but you just communicate like hell, and make sure everybody's, and you work on contracts. Um, so you know that performers are going to show up, um, and you pay people and you find the money for that. And the first few festivals, I didn't make any money. I lost money, but I considered it like my own education, my own tuition, and these types of things. Um, so you know, nothing just happens from, I don't know, just wanting to kind of do it and getting lucky. And I mean, some things happen with a little bit of luck. I think that's a little needed, but
Mhm.
otherwise it's just like pure positioning, yourself, and preparing, and doing the research and doing literally whatever it takes to accomplish whatever goal you have in mind. I mean, everybody's going to be different and think of different things, and that's the beauty of it. And I find that also, the relationships you guys talked about is super important as well. One way I just started developing those is, and I didn't realize I was doing it, and I didn't do it for any selfish reasons, but I promoted my friends. I promoted other people in other genres and the same genre. And when you promote them, you learn a lot about, um, you learn a lot about promotion first of all, and it's very important. Go sell merch at your friends' concerts. Go post about their concerts, share pictures and video from their things, and just brag on your friends, and like that kind of stuff over the years really, you develop trust and rapport with people, and they know that you are, um, a person who can deliver also, and who also is supportive, and they're more likely to work with you or give you opportunities. So, and you, like I said, you got to, it's a development thing, and it can't be out of selfish reasons, but I mean, that's just how business works too. You have something that if you want it sold, you have to create a demand for it. You have to think about the usefulness, and I think really, one of my friends, I have a lot of friends that played in Prince's band. His whole horn section came from Charlotte. And so I remembered one thing my friend told me, that it was like the most important thing Prince always like drilled into them was, you know, how much of a servant they are, you know, how much of a servant he was himself, and then how much of like we are servants. It was like the big thing all the time. And I was like, that's crazy, you know, thinking about artists being servants, and you know, our craft so like amazing, and and it should be appreciated. And but you know, we are, though, in a way, and that's why we are relevant, I think, too. And
We
until
are.
we really embrace that servanthood, we're going to be struggling with relevancy.
I think, yeah, I think you're absolutely right on. But
Yeah.
we are servants to humanity. And in
Right.
order to be a servant to humanity, you have to believe that what you have is something that's good for humanity. So, you know, if you get to that point in your own life, and what that means is respecting yourself and understanding that you're completely unique. There's never been anybody like you in the history of the world. And you have something to give, no matter who you are.
Right.
Especially as musicians, everybody loves music. It's just take music away from the world. What do you got? You know, there are primitive societies that believe that the world exists through sound, and in a sense, that's true, because the world is vibration. Everything vibrates. This piano vibrates. Even the chunk of wood vibrates. A stone vibrates. There's spaces between it, and it's all connected. So once we get to that point, then you can realize, yes, we are servants. We're servants. We don't. You know, there's a story of Beethoven where he's walking down the sidewalk with Nietzsche, I think, and the emperor is walking by with his entourage. You know, and everybody's getting out of the way and kneeling down at the side of the thing, and Beethoven just went charging right through them, which was really unusual for the time. But that was Beethoven, and that's something that he had to teach us, that what we do is important. But the idea of servitude, the idea of, that's so beautiful, Elizabeth. Thank you for that. That's really great.
Right. I mean, it really shocked me to hear that. I was like, Prince, a servant? But it makes sense. I mean, every time you perform, every time, and I tell my students, even the little kids, I'm like, do you have a favorite movie? I'm like, don't you think, like, when they're acting, they're completely engrossed into this world so that they can serve the viewer with an experience that draws them in. So we have to do the same thing as performers. And you know, that's whether you're writing, whether you're performing, there's that. I think you're going to get the strongest result with that servant mentality, and really desire to connect with the people who are going to see it. And it's affected everything from the way I present to the way I design my own events, or my own initiatives in the community too, and down to creating products for artists, you know, like focusing more on that, and sustainability, and anyway, so yeah.
Speaking of that, where do you get those cool T-shirts that the flute duo was wearing the other day?
Oh, the merch.
They had Charlotte New Music. We can talk about that later.
Yeah, I need a system for merch. I need a system for selling merch online. But we do have T-shirts. Usually I just sell them at the in-person events. But I'll send you one.
Buy one.
I've got a drawer full of them. They're all great. They're great.
Oh, they look beautiful. So Chase had a question. Do you think online music distribution will ever overtake in-person performance concerts in terms of financial opportunity? My story is that I came up through all forms of recording, starting with 24-track tape and going through everything, and came up through played on probably 300 records for a lot of them were for the major record companies at the time. There were 7 that they considered major record companies. So I played for a lot of those artists. And every August, we'd get what we called the magic check, which was based on the sales of hard media. Even as a performer, you get this check, through the union. And then as a writer, you get quarterly royalties. So when Spotify came along, this was going to happen no matter who did it. For sure, digitization was going to happen. And the ability to steal, because I still consider it the ability to steal, to take what you don't pay for, unless people give it to you freely. If they don't give it to you freely, you're stealing. So there was a time there when if I would have met the guy who developed Spotify, he would have been in serious trouble. I got over that really fast though. And now what I've seen is part of it is from my age and from not being a part of that whole rock and roll and pop idea. So my royalties are going to dip, but they weren't going to dip that much. In fact, some aging rockers royalties are going like this. I still get kind of the magic checks, for like having a tune I played on being Guardians of the Galaxy or Deadpool or something. Both of them actually. So those are great, but then digital distribution, I would literally get checks from Sony for 14 cents. I said, what is going on? And we checked out. And the fact is that the record companies dropped the ball. They didn't anticipate this. They didn't know how to handle it. They didn't know what to do with it. I think it's coming back to a certain degree. I think the idea that not just the very tiny top of artists should make money from this. There used to be, it's kind of like the income in the United States. There used to be a big middle class and just people at the top, people at the bottom. There's a lot more people at the bottom now, and it's the same way with record company, with record money, with recording money. There's a lot more people at the bottom. There's a few people at the top because, you can self-promote to a certain degree, and sometimes things take off online with your self-promotion. Sometimes you hit a magic spot with people, and they'll get to that. So the answer for me is, I still make more money in person, also because I sell hard copy. I sell CDs and I sell LPs at my concerts. It's kind of like the old days where the blues guys used to go around with, boxes of LPs in their trunk. And after the concert, somebody comes, man, I love that music. Come on out to the, parking lot, and they open up their trunk and sell them a record. So it's kind of like that. And most of my friends find that they're making money at concerts, but even that is changing because now, people used to play music in their cars. Now there's not even a plug-in for a chip or anything. It's all Spotify or whoever it happens to be on your car, or you're playing it from your phone. There's not even a CD player. There's not even a place to plug anything in. So yeah, that's it. I'm not sure in terms of financial opportunity. I'm not sure. It's gotten better for us over the last couple of years. I can say that.
Yeah,
but it
I will
hasn't.
say, sorry, go ahead, Phil.
No, that's fine. Yeah.
I was just going to say that as long as corporations are in charge of it, there's never, digital downloads are never going to be financially viable for artists. I think that there is a movement afoot, and I can't remember what it's called, like GSR or something like that. There's a new royalties agency out there. Phil, do you know what I'm talking about?
Right.
So they're like these very high-end artists who are trying to change, because ASCAP and BMI weren't really doing a good job of advocating in that way. So they kind of went out and became their own royalties group. And it's like and I know because of the university system, I was called into all, for some reason, because I'm a member of ASCAP, they think I'm an expert on royalties. And so I get pulled into these meetings with like athletics who are playing like Drake and all this stuff. And they're like, well, now there's this group that wants us to pay all this money to them too, in addition to ASCAP. And I'm like, I'm just like the composition teacher. Like, I don't know, like this should be negotiated at the universe level, not like the John level. But anyway, until those artists are trying to change those royalty structures, which I think will help those of us who are, not the mainstream pop artists. But I think until they do that, I mean, at least where we are, it's going to be like Phil said. I think the live performance is going to be much more lucrative than royalties for digital distribution. That's for sure. So,
Although if you talk to my sons, one of them's a real monster jazz player, and he has albums on Blue Note, and the other one is indie. His record was called Pear, Pear. Brilliant. It's a brilliant record. If that record came out when I was a kid, he'd be a rich man. But it's tough. And I look at like Lollapalooza. One of my sons is at Lollapalooza this weekend. I look at the list of players. I look at the list of players at all. And I know those people with the small print on the bottom of the poster, they're lucky if they make travel and food. And they're probably sleeping in their van, or they're probably sleeping on their friends' couches, So it's a tough world out there, even in terms of the concert stuff. And here, Elizabeth, you were talking about having to figure out how to raise money and how to get money. And I think that is one of the things that I've been doing. And I've learned, the NEA gets squeezed off, the state arts councils get squeezed more. Then when the venues get the money, they may base their grant on your name, but you're not going to get all that money because they have, as you said, they have a program to fund, and you want them to have that. If there's no venues, we have no place to play. And as much as I enjoyed Pamela Z's videos, I don't want to do that. I like the live show. I'll do it, and I have done it, but so I think that raising the money and figuring out creative ways to raise the money, like for example, what we started doing, there are a lot of places, I play a lot of smaller places around the West, and a lot of them don't have budgets, and they'll say, well, we only have this much. And I say, do you have a bank? And they'll say, yes, we have a bank. I say, tell the banker that I'll put a big, sandwich board up in the front of the auditorium if he'll sponsor part of this concert or the whole concert. I'll say, well, go ask him. And 9 times out of 10, or even more times out of 10, they'll come back and they'll say, yep, we're set. We got the money. We only have this much money, but we raised the rest of it. And they don't really think about raising the rest of it. They say, well, we have a budget. They don't think of going to the community. Well, fact is that, there's a lot of money out there. And there are people who can and willingly will help sponsor the arts. Sometimes they don't want any credit, but really helps if they do get credit. If you go to any concert, there's a whole list of sponsors, and so those kind of things are not what artists normally like to do. And if you don't have representation, if you don't have a manager, they don't like to do that either. So the more involved you are with the community, if there is anybody that you talk to those people in that community. This is in terms of getting pieces performed too, I think. Because there may be a performing group in a little place that wants to play your piece, and they'll say, yep, we got $300. And you'll say, I can't write a 30-minute piece for $300. I'm sorry. And they'll say, what do you want? And I'll tell them, and they'll say, oh. I say, do you know anybody? They say, yeah, maybe. And they very rarely do they not come back with the money. So it's not that those are necessarily the ways that you want to do it, but there is money out there, and you just have to figure out how to get it.
It comes down to that servanthood again. Like, what are you providing? What value are you providing, or what can you creatively provide value for these people in that they can't get anywhere else, because they really can't get what we do in a lot of places. So how can you make it work? How can you serve different people in the community that do different things, like banking or different science communities, or I mean, these people want to reach people too, different people than they've been able to reach. So
I think there's also, so one of the things that I think it needs to be sort of pointed out is we're talking about a whole other sort of skill set, right? We're talking about, like, I know, like, when I, like, my education, boy, I was taught to be a really good composer, and I was taught to be a good teacher. And then to figure out all this other stuff on my own, right? Like, it'd be, and so, and Phil and Elizabeth know there's, like, if you're going to do big projects, you've got to be you have project management skills. I mean, they're talking about just fundraising right there was just as a slice of that. But, Elizabeth organized, getting venues, getting performers, getting all that stuff. It's, so there's a project management side of it that I think that, it's easier in academia because I can walk down the hall and find a cellist and a flute player and all of this. But then, if I want them to go 30 minutes down the road to a performing arts venue, that becomes a whole different sort of order of magnitude. And I think Phil and Elizabeth know that even more, have experienced that probably in more extreme degrees than I have. But so it's that sort of organizational principle. And I will say, in my role now as a director, like, all of that is what I do now. Like, because I was able to develop all that skills, now I'm the person that makes sure that, there's a process for locker sign out. There's a process for this. There's a process, it's like, it's all this project management stuff. And so I successfully transferred those skills into what I do now. But, it's because I developed those skills and was successful at it that where I am. But so, thinking about those things, I think is really important. These skills that Phil and Elizabeth are talking about, because they're sort of the difference between sort of, you can write a great piece of music, but then what happens after that? So I want to kind of encapsulate that for everybody, because I think that's a lot of what they're saying, and it's really good stuff.
Does anybody have any concerns, ideas, questions? Are you all, there's Haley.
I have an oddly specific question. I think it's based off of something that I may have asked you, John, in our previous lesson, and something that I've asked in another panel too. I'm a composer, but also a full-time arts administrator, and I'm in kind of a weird position where I am still learning as an artist, but I am also in the position where I'm helping a lot of other artists who are also considered like emerging or starting out. I'm helping them find resources. And I've been able to learn a lot from that, but I also sometimes feel like I don't take my own advice well, or it's like I tell composers, to carve out a schedule or break down a budget or make a 5-year plan, but I myself do not often do those things. And part of it comes down to like really wanting to give myself more time and devote more time to my artistic practice, which I don't always have time to do, working over 40 hours a week. I'm kind of wondering how you balance that out. I guess it's sort of just like a couple of questions. Like, first, how do I carve out that time and be really disciplined about it? Because in the past 3 years, I haven't been able to do that. Certainly COVID's thrown some things off too, but yeah, how do you do that? And kind of how do you deal with that too? Just like being in that weird position.
I mean, I'm happy to get us started on that. So for me, in what I do is, and we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, and when Phil was talking about this is where I want to go, when he was when he was talking about that, and to me, I think there's a lot of times we get mired in the details that are right in front of us, right? And so, so for me, one of the things that I've done for years is I've kept sort of I keep a file, and I did it more when I was doing the professor thing rather than now. But what I did is I would have like so I did it by semester for myself. So fall this year, spring next year, fall, and so I would actually divide the page into, this is what I'm going to write this semester, and these are the opportunities I'm going to plan, I'm going to apply for, and then the next semester and the next semester. And that helped me, especially with a 10-year timeline. But the point I'm trying to make is that there's the stuff that's right in front of us, but we've always got to be looking at the horizon, right? We can get bogged down in the like what's right here and what do I have to fix, and I've got to pay the rent today, as opposed to where am I going to see myself in so and such and such amount of time. And for me, it's my daydreaming consists of that. But then when I'm at the desk, I'm dealing with my moment by moment. And so I'm sort of thinking about my long-term goals in a sort of separate space. Maybe I'm driving across country, or I'm driving to pick up my son at school or something like that. I'm thinking about those sort of things, like so finding spaces for me to do that where I don't need to figure out 1+1 right now in those details, but I can think about what's the larger sort of trajectory of where I want to go. And so, Haley, I think being able to delineate those two things, and I think Phil I don't know, Phil, I'll turn it over to you, but like, this is where I want to go. When he was saying that earlier, it's like, that's the trajectory, that's the horizon. And then that sort of I think I'm assuming, but forced him to deal with the steps in between. And so being able to sort of stratify this is what I need to get done this week versus this is where I want to see myself in a year, 2 years, 3 years. And allow yourself your space to make those goals. Because I think once you make those goals, that then filters back onto sort of the daily to-do list, right? So, okay, if I want to have this piece ready for this competition and this in a year, I need to write a string quartet. That if that's a goal for you, then the string quartet's going to get on the to-do list as it comes along. So I think a lot of times, and I see that with faculty, a lot of times as they get mired in the daily grind, and they forget they're an artist and they have larger goals that they want to be doing. So that would be my recommendations, trying to think in those. Yeah. So
Yeah, I just want to say one thing, and then Elizabeth, I think, can really talk to this one. And that is that this last year and 5 months, however long it's been, has been really, really tough on a lot of us. And I think personally, I extend this to everybody. I think I find that I had a lot of anxiety because there were things that I wanted to get done that I felt distracted from doing. And that maybe the reality was I wasn't distracted. I could have done them, but psychologically, I just was not able to. Plus, for me, politically, the 4 years before that were like, that's enough to deal with. So I just want to throw that out there, that when you start being hard on yourself, don't be hard on yourself for what you think you didn't accomplish or how difficult it is. We're entering into a new time, and we have to recover a bit from what we went through. But I think that the opening is full of energy and full of optimism. So that's the way I feel.
One thing you said stuck out to me, Haley. I am jealous of people who have 40-hour work weeks. And sometimes I get those, and sometimes I take weeks off here and there, but not, when I'm striving towards a goal, it's not uncommon for me to work 80 to 100 hours in a week. And I try not to do that, and I'm very protective over my time when I'm not doing that. But sometimes you just gotta work your ass off, and like literally do whatever it takes to get to the point where you're not just working for somebody else, and that your life isn't just going towards that entity that isn't invested in you, and so and you got to dig yourself out of that, and it's not easy. And yeah, so it's not uncommon for me, if I have a big project coming up, or if I have some goals that I'm going to be doing, and I get prepared for it. I know what to expect at this point because I've had to do it several times. But yeah, it's just sometimes you just have to double that 40 hours, right? 40 hours for them, 40 hours for you, and then see what happens. Do it. Have you done that much?
Yeah, I did. I think,
Okay.
like Phil said, COVID really threw me off. I had an injury that really threw me off, and is still kind of. So yeah, I'm famously bad at giving myself credit for things, but I think that's kind of what I'm planning to do going forward. So it's really helpful to hear all of that. Yeah.
Good. And it sucks, but you know, your time, luckily if at a job you're getting paid for it, and then on the other 40 hours it's more of an investment, and you have to treat it like an investment, and don't squander that investment, you know. So it's got to be very directed, very strategic, and all that.
So that,
Oh, sorry.
no, go ahead, John.
So one of the things, and Elizabeth sort of went down this a little bit earlier, is I think sometimes it's, and it comes back to a little bit of well, there's one of the major things that I had to get over professionally was that I thought there were things that I did and things that I didn't do. And one of the things that was a really sort of eye-opening moment for me, and it didn't happen until maybe 5 years ago, I just started doing whatever anybody asked me to do. Like I just said yes to just like everything. And it was like crazy, insane stuff that like, there was one piece, I shared it, I think, with the festival last year, the year before, that like there's a bass and cello duo at the North Carolina School of the Arts, and they're very, very shticky. I mean, it's like very like comedic performance type stuff. And I'm like, I'm not that guy. And they're like, we want you to write us a piece. And I'm like, and I'm like, I'll give it a shot, and it was like a blast. It was like one of the hardest things I've done, but it was like amazing. It was fun. And it ended up being really great. And then like, I got like a commission to do a Christmas cantata. And I'm like, I'm not really a Christmas music kind of guy. And I'm like, I'm just going to try this. And it was like a ton of fun. It was one of the big churches in Charlotte that commissioned me to do it. And it's just kind of this thing where it turned me on with like this like, I sent an email earlier and I can't remember, somebody was asking me, it was my associate director was like, well, we don't usually do this, but if you want to do it, we can, it's kind of on you. And I'm like, and I just emailed back, I'm like, well, I'll just say yes to it and I'll figure it out by the time I get there, kind of thing. And it's that kind of attitude that, I'm like, I don't know how much work it is. I don't, and it's back to kind of what Elizabeth was saying, like, well, this person bought this plane ticket, now I'm in it to win it, and so I'm just gonna, and so Haley, it's kind of to a little bit to your point, it's like, just like committing to that. And then, the rest is details. Right? Like if you're going to commit to doing now there's a discipline aspect to it, right? Like if you commit to it and you really have to follow through on it, that's one thing. And so I find myself all the time. It's one of the reasons I love the job that I'm in right now, is because every day is different. I have no idea what someone's going to ask me to do, and I have no idea how I'm going to get anything accomplished. But you know what? I'm going to say yes to the majority of it, and we'll see what happens. I don't know.
I hope they don't know that.
What's that?
I hope they don't know that.
Yeah, I hope there aren't any faculty on here, but anyway, so it's the kind of thing where, but it's the kind of thing where it's just like, it's the detail, we kind of get worried about like, well, how am I, like you get worried a lot of times, like how I'm going to do that. And I think, Elizabeth is a great example. It's like, at some point along, like to me, I used to talk to Elizabeth's mother about this. I'm like, she's just fearless, because it's not like she doesn't have a mechanism that says like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. She just says like, I'm going to do it. And then it just like happens. And that was one of the things that I don't have that mechanism, right? I'm like worried about like, well, I don't even know how to get from, and it took me years to sort of work through that. I'm like, I don't know. I had a dean tell me a couple of years ago, he said yes to this like $1 million project. He's like, I don't know where I was going to get $1 million, but I just said yes. And, so then I had to do it. And so, so just this kind of attitude that you're sort of diving in feet first or head first all the time, and you're going to sort out the details as you get there, I think is a really great attitude to have. We like to sit in these very sort of protective little sort of, this is who I am and this is what I'm good at. And I actually realized that I can probably be pretty good at most things if I just try it. And I'll qualify that by saying that I'm pretty good at something. The first time I'm pretty good at something. The second time I'm really good at something, right? So the first time I do it, it's like, yeah. So the next time it's like, well, I'm not gonna do it that way. I'm gonna do it the right way this time because now I know what it is. So just kind of diving in and committing yourself, I think is part of that as well. So.
Chase had a really nice thing to say. He said, I say to myself, I'm going to get at least one little thing done toward my dream every day. That's a really, one little thing. It could be one little tiny thing, or it could be a bunch of hours, depends on what your deadlines are. But I think that's a pretty great way to look at it too. You know, maybe that one little thing will cost you a lot of hours of sleep, but
Well, and our
doing-
goals, and I think our goals aren't like one big step.
Hmm.
They're like a million little steps, right? So to Chase's point, it's like, you know, if you get that one thing done today, you've taken that one step. It's like you got to walk. If you're going to walk from here to there, you might as well start walking. You know, don't sit around and wait for the ride to come pick you up. You just got to start walking because no one's going
That's
to
it.
carry you. So
That's
Chase,
it.
that's a great point.
Yeah. I just noticed that my picture says Dr. Aaberg. It's kind of a joke. I apologize. You know, it's not a joke, but they call piano players, sometimes they're called professor, you know, in the jazz tradition, or doctor. So I just put that on my computer. I didn't know it popped up there. But I did get a doctorate, honorary doctorate from Montana State University. And that was not because I gave them a bunch of money or that I even went to Montana State University, but it was really because of community stuff. I started a group called Arts Without Boundaries. And the idea of that group, that was self-serving in some ways, but it was because I came from a rural background. And we'd been talking about this, like, how do you, this music that we all love, to me, I always thought it was such a waste for it to stay in New York or LA or Rome or Milan or wherever it is that you are. And I thought, oh, it's so important to get this out into the world. And that was part of it. So I would bring, you know, there's a lot of what I call residency performers, and that they do all these kind of school residencies around here. They're okay. You know, I mean, some of those people are okay. Some of them are great teachers. They're not always great teachers and great performers, but I know a lot of great teachers and great performers, and we would get together and go out into the communities and do this music. But we would be on tour, and a lot of times a little school would call us and say, hey, we see you're over in Malta. We're in Harlem. Would you stop by? And these are little towns in Montana. Harlem is on the reservation, on the Assiniboine Gros Ventre reservation. And they said, could you guys stop in and do something for the kids for 40 minutes? We're not going to say no. We're just not going to say no. But I got to the point where we were doing a lot of those, and I thought, no, we should be able to make some money for the guys that come out to do this stuff. So we started this group. And anyway, that's where the doctorate came from, for doing this community stuff. But you don't have to call me doctor. See how we doing for time. Got 12 minutes, I guess.
Well, we
Any
don't have
other-
to take the whole time, but if anybody has any other questions or points, topics you'd like us to hear more about, yeah.
Chase. Yeah.
Hey, I don't know if you guys can actually hear me. My computer's breaking. Are you able to hear me? Okay. Thank you for sharing all that you have been sharing, and you're very genuine about everything, and I appreciate that, because some academic higher education, they are genuine to a certain point before they hit things that they don't know about. And such a big part of being a good teacher is just sometimes saying, I don't know, just try it. But anyway, I wanted to ask if you have any like really quick resources that might be helpful for those looking for opportunities. For instance, like Composer's site, they have some opportunities that they list for competitions and things, but I think they're geared toward really big competitions that are really difficult to ever get a chance of winning. I don't know if there's any others out there that you might know of.
State
Well-
art councils are really good, and if you hook up with any state arts council, you know, get on their mailing list, and usually they'll send out a bunch of stuff that's going on in the state, and a lot of those smaller grants and smaller opportunities are available to everybody. So that's one thing.
We have Charlotte New Music has an opportunities page that is updated every 2 weeks with special curated opportunities. A composer who came through here about 6 years ago was building a newsletter doing this about a year and a half ago, and yeah, Ryan Siewski. And so I saw that he was doing this. I'm like, dude, let me give you a webpage on it, and will help promote it, and that's his little project. So check that out. He takes pride in really getting doable stuff on there.
Haley, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I feel like I've been making a couple of shameless plugs today, but I just have to make another one because I and my team curate this page. Composers Forum has an opportunities page that curates all of the opportunities we post. It's really upfront about the price, who they're looking for, what they're looking for. There's a certain set of like equitability guidelines that an opportunity has to meet before it's posted. And I have to update it because I'm obviously off of work this week, but that gets posted or updated on a weekly basis. I would also say, like, second what Elizabeth is saying, and all of the local listings are really helpful. Like I know that Minnesota has something called Springboard for the Arts, and they do like a job board and an opportunities board that's like interdisciplinary, and like small scale stuff is helpful because I know that feeling of like wading through Composer site and looking for opportunities, and it can feel really just like overwhelming.
John, did you see Zach's question?
Yeah, I did. If that's, I'll jump in and answer that one real quick. So it depends. So who to contact is always dicey. So for example, where I am, if an artist contacts me to be a guest artist, I'm going to actually forward your email down to whatever area it's most appropriate, right? So if you're a pianist, I'll send you to piano. If you're a composer, I'll send you to composition, because I actually give control of guest artist budgets over to different areas. So they're allowed to pick and choose who they're bringing in for that. Timing is tricky. So to answer the first question, you can contact the director or the chair, and they may filter you somewhere. What I would recommend is probably email the chair or the director and copy one of the faculty members who's in the area that you're interested in. So if it's the composition or theory area, something like that, copy one of them, and they may be able to help advocate for you. The timing is most of those decisions are made for us probably by April 15th for the next year. So probably sometime around the February-March timeframe would be the best time to do that, because it really has nothing to do with budget, it has more to do with space scheduling. So for us, we have our entire concert calendar and everything built by about April 1st, the year before the academic year starts. So, and that's when we build in what spaces we can use for guest artists and things. So usually probably February, March for most schools. It just depends on when their performance calendar is. So I hope that helps. Other questions?
Right, other questions? Great. Well, I hope you guys got a lot out of this. Good stuff, you guys. Thank you, Phil and John,
Yeah,
for
pleasure.
sharing your perspectives, your experiences, and genuine helpfulness. Thank you.
Thank
And
you,
everybody
guys.
really appreciates that. I enjoyed hearing about it too. So, yeah.
There's always more. And I
Anything-
just wanted to say too, if you guys anybody here, if you ever want to contact me, I think my email is there. If you ever have any questions about opportunities in Montana, Charles Nichols left Montana, and somebody kind of like, they're kind of like fish behind a big rock. Somebody zipped right into the spot right away. And there aren't as many of those kind of academic opportunities because people tend to stay here until they drop dead in their studio, I think. But there are always other kinds of things, and I've done a lot of teaching in different kinds of situations. I think community schools is one really great thing, and we were talking about community and we were talking about contacts, and I think those kind of things are really wonderful to do. You're doing a big service to people, and you're meeting a lot of like-minded people.
And I've told several people this now, but like conferences are really, really great for building contacts, and different kinds of conferences in different industries are super interesting, and you'll always learn a lot. try to volunteer, get in for free. But yeah, it's interesting.
I dropped my email in the chat, and you can always find me at JMU if you do a search for me. But yeah, I'm happy to answer questions when people email. I think it's, to me, a lot of higher education does not talk about this, and it's one of the things that I've talked about for years at the Charlotte Music Festival, giving that kind of training, professional training for composers, for at least for me in higher education. I mean, I know a lot about that, so I'm happy to give any advice if people need that. So send me an email.
All right, thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon, and
Thank you, guys.
we'll see do a Zunda.
See you later.
All right, bye guys.
So long.
Bye everyone.